Zara pressed her four-fingered hand against the cold metal wall of the space station, feeling the vibrations of distant explosions ripple through the structure. Her large, dark eyes reflected the red emergency lights that bathed the corridor in an ominous glow. The Kithran female had spent most of her life believing humans were nothing more than primitive warmongers who had somehow stumbled into space travel. Today, she was about to learn how wrong she had been. The attack had come without warning. The Void Seekers, a nightmarish species that consumed entire worlds, had emerged from the dark space between galaxies. Their black ships moved like living shadows, swallowing light itself as they approached the peaceful trading station of Haven's Rest. Zara had been here on diplomatic business, representing her people in trade, negotiations with various species when the alarms began, screaming. She watched through the observation deck as the first wave of Void Seeker ships descended upon the station's outer defenses. The alien vessels looked like massive black beetles with razor-sharp legs that could tear through hull plating like paper. Their weapons didn't fire energy beams or projectiles. Instead, they released clouds of darkness that seemed to eat away at whatever they touched, leaving nothing but empty space behind. The station's multi-species security force had tried to mount a defense, but they were overwhelmed within minutes. Zara saw Valorian fighters known throughout the galaxy for their courage turn and flee in terror. The proud Nethris warriors, who had never retreated from any battle, abandoned their posts and ran for the escape pods. Even the mechanical Centauri, who felt no fear, simply shut down their systems rather than face the approaching horror. But then the humans arrived. Zara had heard stories about the human fleet. Most species considered them reckless and unpredictable. They used outdated technology and relied too heavily on direct combat instead of sophisticated tactics. The galactic community tolerated them because they were useful as mercenaries and shock troops, but few took them seriously as a military force. 3 human destroyers dropped out of hyperspace just as the Void Seekers began boarding the station. The ships were old and scarred from countless battles, their hulls patched with mismatched metal plates. They looked like scrap compared to the sleek vessels of other advanced civilizations. Zara almost felt sorry for the humans who were about to face such overwhelming darkness. The human fleet commander's voice crackled over the station's communication system. His words were simple and direct, spoken in the rough accent that marked him as coming from one of humanity's frontier worlds. "This is Captain Marcus Chen of the UES Defiance. We're moving to engage the hostiles. All civilians evacuate to the intersections immediately. Military personnel prepare for boarding action." Zara watched in amazement as the 3 human ships charged straight toward the massive Void Seeker fleet. They didn't use clever maneuvers or try to outflank the enemy. They simply flew directly into the heart of the darkness, their weapons blazing. The humans fired everything they had: kinetic rounds, plasma bolts, nuclear missiles, and even primitive explosive shells that other species had abandoned centuries ago. What shocked Zara most was that it worked. The Void Seekers, who had shrugged off the advanced energy weapons of other species, actually took damage from the human assault. Their dark hulls cracked under the barrage of solid projectiles. Their shadow clouds dispersed when hit by the raw explosive force of human warheads. The boarding pods came next. While other species used sophisticated transport systems and energy shields, the humans simply fired metal tubes full of soldiers directly at the enemy ships. The pods crashed through Void Seeker hulls like bullets, and armed humans poured out, fighting their way through the alien vessels with nothing but determination and automatic weapons. On the station, Zara heard the thunder of human boots in the corridors above. A squad of human Marines had somehow made it through the Void Seeker blockade and were now fighting their way toward the station's critical systems. She could hear the distinctive sound of human weapons, the sharp crack of projectile rifles and the deeper boom of explosive charges. A group of terrified Valorians ran past her hiding spot, their elegant feathers singed and their usually proud bearing broken by fear. Behind them came something that made Zara's blood freeze. A Void Seeker warrior glided down the corridor like a living nightmare. It stood nearly 3 meters tall, its body seeming to absorb the light around it. Where its face should have been, there was only a swirling vortex of darkness that hurt to look at directly. The creature moved with terrible purpose, its clawed hands reaching out to touch the walls. Wherever it made contact, the metal simply ceased to exist, leaving gaps that led to empty space. Zara pressed herself deeper into her hiding spot, knowing that if the thing found her, she would simply be unmade, erased from existence itself. Then she heard a human voice, calm and professional despite the situation. Contact front. One hostile, approximately 3 meters tall. Engaging. A human soldier stepped into view at the far end of the corridor. He was smaller than the Void Seeker, wearing armor that looked primitive compared to the high-tech equipment other species used. His weapon was a simple projectile rifle, the kind of thing that museum pieces were made of. By all logic, he should have been terrified. Should have run like every other species had done. Instead, he raised his rifle and began firing. The bullet struck the Void Seeker and actually made it stumble backward. The creature let out a sound like reality tearing, but the human didn't flinch. He methodically reloaded his weapon and continued his advance, laying down a steady stream of fire that forced the nightmare back step by step. More humans appeared, flanking the creature from side passages. They moved with practiced coordination, calling out positions and sharing ammunition without panic or fear. Zara watched in disbelief as these primitive warriors not only held their ground against a force that had terrorized the galaxy, but actually began to push it back. The Void Seeker warrior tried to use its reality-destroying touch on the lead human, but the soldier was too quick. He rolled aside and came up firing, his shots finding weak points in the creature's dark form. When his rifle ran empty, he simply drew a knife and charged. Zara closed her eyes, certain she was about to witness the human's death. When she opened them again, the Void Seeker was retreating, dark fluid leaking from multiple wounds. The human stood over its fallen form, breathing hard but very much alive. For the first time in her life, Zara began to understand why humans had earned their place among the stars. The human soldier noticed Zara crouched in the maintenance alcove and immediately lowered his weapon. His face was young, maybe 25 in human years, with brown skin marked by small scars that spoke of previous battles. Unlike the cold, calculating expression she had seen on other species' warriors, his eyes held something she hadn't expected, genuine concern for her safety. "Ma'am, are you injured?" he asked, extending a gloved hand to help her up. His voice was steady despite having just faced down a creature that could unmake reality itself. Zara stared at the offered hand, her mind struggling to process what she had witnessed. This human had just driven off a Void Seeker using nothing but primitive projectile weapons and raw courage. She had seen Valorian champions, beings trained from birth for combat, flee in terror from these same creatures. I am unharmed," she managed to say, accepting his help. Her own voice sounded strange to her ears, shaky in a way that embarrassed her. How did you make it retreat?" The human, she could see the name Rodriguez stenciled on his armor, shrugged as if fighting cosmic horrors was a daily occurrence. "They don't like getting shot, turns out. Same as anything else that bleeds." Another explosion rocked the station, and Rodriguez immediately activated his communication device. "This is Sergeant Rodriguez. Corridor 7 Alpha is secure. 1 hostile neutralized, 1 civilian rescued. Moving to rendezvous point." "Copy that, Rodriguez. Good work. We've got reports of multiple breaches in the residential sections. Captain wants all squads to converge on the civilian shelters." Zara listened to the calm, professional exchange with growing amazement. These humans were treating a battle against reality-devouring monsters like a routine military operation. She had studied human psychology as part of her diplomatic training and knew they felt fear just like any other species. So why weren't they showing it? "Ma'am, I need to get you to a safe location," Rodriguez said, checking his rifle and loading a fresh magazine. "The evacuation centers are heavily defended. You'll be protected there." "Wait," Zara said, surprising herself with the firmness in her voice. "I want to understand. Your people. You're not afraid of these creatures?" Rodriguez paused, considering her question seriously. "Oh, we're terrified," he admitted. "These things are the stuff of nightmares. But being scared doesn't mean you get to quit. People are depending on us." Another human soldier appeared at the end of the corridor, moving with the same purposeful stride. This one was older, a grizzled veteran with sergeant stripes on her sleeve. She carried a weapon that looked like it had been cobbled together from spare parts. But Zara was beginning to understand that human equipment was more effective than it appeared. "Rodriguez, we've got a problem," the sergeant called out. "The main shelter's been breached. Captain Chen wants volunteers for a rescue mission." "How many civilians?" Rodriguez asked without hesitation. "About 300. Mixed species. The Void Seekers have them trapped in the central plaza." Zara felt her heart sink. 300 beings trapped with those nightmare creatures meant 300 deaths. No force in the galaxy had successfully rescued anyone from a void seeker feeding ground. The creatures didn't just kill their victims, they erased them completely, removing them from existence as if they had never been. "I'll take point," Rodriguez said, as if volunteering for certain death was the most natural thing in the world. "Rodriguez, that's suicide," the sergeant replied. "The plaza is completely overrun. We're talking about maybe 50 void seekers in a confined space." "Then we better get moving before more show up," he said with grim humor. "Ma'am," he turned to Zara, "I need to get you to a secure location first." "No," Zara heard herself say. Both humans looked at her in surprise. "I'm coming with you." "Absolutely not," Rodriguez said firmly. "You're a civilian, and this is going to be the most dangerous mission any of us have ever attempted." Zara straightened to her full height, which brought her roughly to Rodriguez's shoulder. Her people were not built for combat. They were diplomats and traders evolved for negotiation rather than war. But something about watching these humans face impossible odds with such quiet determination had awakened something in her. "I know the station's layout better than you do," she said. "I've been here for 3 weeks. There are maintenance passages that could get your people closer to the plaza without being detected." The sergeant studied her with calculating eyes. "She's got a point, Rodriguez. We could use local knowledge." "It's still too dangerous," Rodriguez protested. "Everything about this is too dangerous," the sergeant replied. "But if we don't try, those 300 people are dead anyway. At least this way they have a chance." Zara watched the brief exchange and realized something profound was happening. These humans weren't just brave. They were choosing to be brave. They felt the same fear she did, but they were making a conscious decision to act despite it. The concept was alien to her understanding of how intelligent beings should behave. Rodriguez finally nodded reluctantly. "All right, but you stay behind our defensive line at all times. Promise me." "I promise," Zara said, though she had no idea what a defensive line meant in practical terms. The sergeant activated her communicator. "This is Sergeant Martinez. We have local assistance for the plaza rescue, requesting permission to proceed with alternate route." Captain Chen's voice crackled back through the device. "Granted. You have 20 minutes before we start the diversionary attack. Make them count." As they moved through the station's corridors, Zara began to notice things she had missed before. The humans weren't randomly charging into danger. They were following carefully planned tactics. They checked corners, communicated constantly, and covered each other's movements with military precision. Their equipment might look primitive, but they used it with devastating effectiveness. They reached a maintenance shaft that would take them to within 50 meters of the central plaza. Through the metal grating, they could hear sounds that made Zara's skin crawl. The wet, sliding noise of void seekers moving about, punctuated by the terrified cries of trapped civilians. "Remember," Martinez whispered as she prepared to cut through the grating, "these things feed on fear as much as flesh. The more scared you are, the stronger they get. So when we go in there, you think about home. Think about the people you love. Think about anything except how terrified you are." Zara nodded, though she wasn't sure she understood. How could thinking about pleasant things help in combat against creatures that could erase you from existence? Rodriguez must have seen her confusion because he leaned closer. "It's not magic," he said quietly. "It's just that fear makes you hesitate, makes you second-guess yourself. And against things like this, hesitation kills. So we focus on what we're fighting for instead of what we're fighting against." The grating came free with a soft click, and Martinez peered into the plaza beyond. Her face went pale, but her voice remained steady when she reported back. 57 hostiles confirmed. Civilian casualties significant, but there are still people alive in there. Zara looked through the opening and immediately wished she hadn't. The central plaza, once a beautiful gathering space filled with shops and cafes, had been transformed into something from the deepest nightmares. Void seekers moved through the area like living shadows, their reality-distorting presence warping the very air around them. Where they had fed, nothing remained, not even bloodstains or torn clothing. Just empty space that hurt to look at. But there were indeed survivors huddled together in small groups, protected by some kind of energy barrier that flickered weakly against the encroaching darkness. "Emergency power fields," Rodriguez observed. "They won't last much longer." Martinez checked her weapon one final time. "All right, people. This is what we came here to do. Remember, aim for center mass, keep moving, and watch each other's backs." "Questions?" Zara had about 1,000 questions, but Rodriguez was already helping her through the opening. In moments, they would be in direct combat with creatures that had terrified the galaxy's greatest warriors. For the first time in her life, she was about to fight alongside humans. The moment they dropped into the plaza, Zara understood why other species fled from the Void Seekers. The air itself felt wrong, thick and oppressive, as if reality was slowly being digested around them. The creatures moved like liquid shadow, their forms shifting and flowing in ways that made her eyes water to track. Where they passed, the very structure of the space station seemed to age and decay, metal rusting and lights failing. Rodriguez landed beside her in a crouch, his rifle already raised and tracking targets. The weapon looked absurdly inadequate against the nightmares surrounding them, but he showed no hesitation as he began firing controlled bursts at the nearest Void Seeker. The bullet struck the creature and actually staggered it backward. Dark fluid sprayed from the impact points, hissing where it hit the deck plating. The Void Seeker let out a sound like reality tearing. But instead of advancing on the human who had wounded it, the creature actually recoiled. "They don't like iron," Martinez called out as she emerged from cover, her own weapon barking steadily. Old Earth superstition turned out to be true. Cold iron disrupts their molecular cohesion. Zara watched in fascination as more human soldiers poured into the plaza. They moved with practiced efficiency, establishing overlapping fields of fire and calling out target locations to each other. Their communications were calm and professional, as if they were conducting a training exercise rather than fighting creatures that could unmake them with a touch. Contact left. 2 hostiles approaching the Valorian survivors, one soldier reported. "I see them. Suppressing fire, drive them back toward the fountain," Martinez responded. "Rodriguez, take your team and secure the right flank. Don't let them cut off our exit route." The humans fought with a coordination that Zara had never seen before. Each soldier seemed to know exactly where the others were and what they were doing. They shared ammunition without being asked, covered each other's reloading, and provided suppressing fire to allow wounded comrades to reach safety. But what struck her most was their absolute refusal to abandon anyone. When a young Nethris civilian was caught in the open between 2 advancing Void Seekers, 3 human soldiers immediately broke from their positions to reach him. They formed a protective triangle around the terrified alien, their weapons creating a wall of projectiles that forced the creatures back. "Why?" Zara found herself asking Rodriguez as he reloaded beside her. "Why risk everything for people you don't even know?" Rodriguez glanced at her briefly before returning his attention to the battle. "Because if we don't, who will?" The simplicity of his answer hit her like a physical blow. There was no complex philosophy behind human courage, no genetic programming or cultural imperative. They fought because someone had to fight. They protected the innocent because the innocent needed protection. It was that straightforward and that profound. A Void Seeker broke through the human perimeter and advanced on a group of Kithran civilians huddled near an overturned food cart. Zara recognized some of them, fellow diplomats she had worked with over the past weeks. The creature raised one clawed hand, reality warping around its fingertips as it prepared to erase them from existence. Without thinking, Zara grabbed a fallen piece of metal debris and threw it at the creature. The improvised projectile bounced harmlessly off its dark form, but it was enough to get the Void Seeker's attention. Those swirling vortexes that served as its eyes turned toward her, and she felt a cold deeper than space begin to seep into her bones. Rodriguez was beside her in an instant, his rifle chattering as he pumped round after round into the creature's center mass. "Stay behind me!" he shouted, but Zara found herself unable to move. The Void Seeker's gaze held her frozen, and she could feel her very existence beginning to unravel. The creature reached toward her with one terrible hand, and she knew that in seconds she would simply cease to be. But Rodriguez stepped directly between them, taking the touch meant for her. Zara expected to see the human soldier dissolve into nothingness. Instead, Rodriguez grimaced in pain but remained solid. His armor was smoking where the creature had touched it, and she could see frost forming on the metal. But he was still there, still fighting. "Personal energy shield," he grunted, firing his rifle point-blank into the Void Seeker's torso. "Standard issue for boarding actions. Won't last long against these things, but it buys us time." The creature staggered backward, dark fluid pouring from multiple wounds. Rodriguez pressed his advantage, advancing steadily and maintaining a constant rate of fire. Other human soldiers converged on their position, adding their weapons to the assault. Under the combined barrage, the Void Seeker finally collapsed, its form dissolving into shadow that quickly evaporated. "Nice work, Rodriguez," Martinez called out. "But we've got bigger problems. Scan shows more hostiles incoming from the upper levels. Lots more." Zara looked up through the plaza's transparent dome and felt her heart stop. A massive Void Seeker vessel was descending toward the station, its reality-distorting hull blocking out the stars. As she watched, creatures began dropping from its belly like living shadows, their forms growing more solid as they approached the plaza. "How many?" Rodriguez asked, helping Zara to her feet. "Sensors can't get an accurate count," Martinez replied grimly. "The interference from their ship is too strong, but it looks like at least 200 hostiles incoming." The human soldiers around the plaza exchanged glances, and Zara saw something pass between them that she was beginning to recognize. It wasn't resignation or despair. It was the look of people making a hard decision together. "Orders, Sergeant?" Rodriguez asked. Martinez was quiet for a moment, studying the approaching swarm of enemies. "We hold the line. All civilians get evacuated first. No one gets left behind." "Ma'am, with respect, that's impossible," one of the other soldiers said. "We don't have enough ammunition for a sustained engagement against those numbers." "Then we'll have to be creative," Martinez replied. She activated her communicator. "Captain Chen, this is Martinez. We're about to be overwhelmed down here. Requesting immediate evacuation for all civilians." "Negative, Martinez. All evacuation craft are engaged. You're on your own for the next 30 minutes minimum." 30 minutes. Zara looked at the descending horde of Void Seekers and knew that even these incredible humans couldn't last 30 seconds against such overwhelming numbers. The civilians they had come to rescue would die, and their rescuers would die with them. But the humans didn't surrender. Instead, they began moving with even greater purpose, repositioning equipment and setting up what looked like defensive barriers using overturned tables and debris. Rodriguez pressed something into Zara's hands, a small sidearm that looked like a toy compared to the weapons the soldiers carried. "Point and shoot," he said simply. "Safety's off, chambers loaded." "Just point and shoot." "I don't know how to fight," she protested. "You threw that debris at the Void Seeker to protect your people," Rodriguez replied. "You already know how to fight. Now you just need to learn how to aim." Around them, the other humans were making similar preparations. They distributed ammunition among the survivors who were capable of fighting, showed them basic weapon handling, and organized defensive positions. In minutes, they had transformed a collection of terrified civilians into something resembling a military unit. The first wave of new Void Seekers touched down at the plaza's perimeter. Unlike the individual creatures they had faced before, these moved in coordinated groups, their reality-distorting presence creating zones of twisted space that hurt to look at directly. "Here they come," Martinez announced over the communication system. "Remember short, controlled bursts. Aim for center mass. Watch your ammunition. And whatever happens, we don't give up." Zara raised the human weapon with trembling hands, her 4 fingers barely able to grip it properly. Around her, beings from a dozen different species were doing the same, all of them learning from humans how to stand and fight against impossible odds. The Void Seekers began their advance, and Zara realized that everything she had believed about courage, about survival, about what it meant to be a civilized being, was about to change forever. The first shots rang out across the plaza, and Zara discovered that the sound of human weapons firing in unison was unlike anything she had ever heard. It wasn't the clean, precise hum of energy weapons that most civilized species used. Instead, it was raw and violent, the angry bark of projectile weapons spitting metal death at their enemies. Rodriguez knelt beside an overturned bench, his rifle steady as he fired carefully aimed shots at the advancing Void Seekers. Each bullet found its mark, sending dark creatures stumbling backward or dissolving into shadow. But for every one that fell, 3 more took its place. "Zara, remember what I taught you?" he called out without taking his eyes off his targets. "Breathe in, hold it, squeeze the trigger gently. Don't jerk it." She raised the pistol he had given her, trying to steady her shaking hands. A Void Seeker was approaching a group of injured Valorians, its clawed hands reaching out to unmake them. Zara aimed as carefully as she could and pulled the trigger. The recoil surprised her, nearly knocking the weapon from her grip. But the bullet struck the creature in what might have been its shoulder, spinning it around and buying the Valorians time to crawl toward the human defensive line. Dark fluid splattered across the deck plating, hissing and smoking where it landed. "Good shot," Rodriguez called out. "Now find another target." Around the plaza, an impossible battle was taking place. Civilian refugees from a dozen species were standing shoulder to shoulder with human soldiers, all of them firing whatever weapons they could find at an enemy that should have been unstoppable. A Nethris merchant wielded a human assault rifle with surprising skill. A group of Centauri engineers had somehow jury-rigged an energy weapon to fire solid projectiles. Even some of the younger Valorians had overcome their terror enough to join the fight, but the humans were the backbone of the defense. They moved between positions with practiced ease, distributing ammunition, treating wounded, and calling out tactical instructions. Sergeant Martinez seemed to be everywhere at once, shouting orders and encouragement in equal measure. "Henderson, take your squad and reinforce the left flank. Those things are trying to flank us. Williams, we need suppressing fire on that cluster near the fountain. Keep them pinned down. Rodriguez, civilian casualties by the information kiosk. Get a medical team over there." The Void Seekers were learning, adapting their tactics as the battle progressed. Instead of advancing in straight lines, they began using the plaza's features for cover, sliding between overturned tables and hiding behind structural pillars. Their reality-distorting presence made targeting difficult. Looking directly at them caused painful disorientation, and their dark forms seemed to shift and blur. Zara found herself crouched behind a decorative planter with a young Kithran engineer named Drac. He had never held a weapon before today, but he was gamely trying to operate a human rifle that was too large for his smaller frame. "I don't understand," he said between shots. "Why aren't they retreating?" "The humans, I mean. This is hopeless. We're all going to die." Zara thought about Rodriguez's simple answer earlier. "Because if we don't, who will?" She was beginning to understand that human courage wasn't the absence of fear or despair. It was the decision to act despite those feelings. "They're not thinking about dying," she told Drac. "They're thinking about living, about making sure we get the chance to live." A massive explosion rocked the station, and chunks of debris rained down into the plaza. Through the transparent dome above, Zara could see that one of the human destroyers was ramming directly into a Void Seeker capital ship. The human vessel was barely a tenth the size of its opponent, but it struck with such force that both ships erupted in a brilliant fireball. "That's the Defiance," Martinez announced over the communication system. "Captain Chen just took out their command ship." A cheer went up from the human soldiers, but it was short-lived. More Void Seeker ships were emerging from the darkness beyond the station, and the remaining human vessels were heavily outnumbered. "Ma'am," one of the soldiers called out, "ammunition is running low. We're down to maybe 5 minutes of sustained fire." Martinez nodded grimly. "Then we make those 5 minutes count. Rodriguez, prepare for close quarters combat. Everyone else, fix bayonets." Zara watched in amazement as the human soldiers attached long knives to the ends of their rifles. The primitive weapons looked absurd against enemies that could warp reality itself. But the humans showed no hesitation in preparing for hand-to-hand combat. "What's a bayonet going to do against creatures like that?" Drac asked. Rodriguez overheard the question and grinned fiercely. "Same thing bullets do. They're still physical beings, just from a different reality. Cut them enough and they die." The ammunition finally ran out just as the largest wave of Void Seekers reached the human defensive line. What followed was the most savage close-quarters combat Zara had ever witnessed. Human soldiers charged into melee with creatures that towered over them, using rifle butts, bayonets, and even bare hands to fight enemies that could erase them with a touch. She saw Rodriguez grappling with a Void Seeker twice his size, his personal shield sparking and failing as the creature tried to unmake him, but instead of dissolving, he managed to drive his bayonet deep into what might have been the thing's heart. Dark fluid exploded from the wound and the creature collapsed. Martinez was wielding her rifle like a club, the bayonet flashing as she drove it again and again into a Void Seeker that had cornered a group of civilian children. Her face was set in grim determination, and she showed no sign of backing down even when the creature's claws raked across her armor. All around the plaza, similar battles were taking place. Humans and aliens fought side by side against impossible odds, buying time for the wounded to be evacuated and for rescue ships to arrive. Zara found herself in the thick of it, using her pistol at point-blank range against creatures that had haunted galactic nightmares for generations. But the most incredible thing was the effect the human example was having on the other species. Valorians who had fled in terror earlier were now standing firm, their fear transformed into anger at what these creatures represented. Nethris merchants fought with improvised weapons, protecting families that weren't even their own. Even the logical Centauri were showing something that could only be called courage, just when it seemed they would be overwhelmed. A new sound echoed through the plaza, the distinctive whine of human dropships approaching fast. Through the dome, Zara could see 3 small craft diving through the debris field, their hulls scarred by enemy fire but still flying. "This is Lieutenant Commander Sarah Park of the UES Retribution," a voice crackled over the communication system. "We're coming in hot. All personnel prepare for immediate evacuation." The dropships crashed through the plaza's dome in a shower of transparent metal, their weapons blazing as they provided cover fire for the beleaguered defenders. Human Marines poured out of the craft, their fresh weapons and ammunition turning the tide of battle. But even as rescue arrived, Zara realized that something fundamental had changed inside her. She was no longer the same Kithran diplomat who had hidden in terror just hours ago. She had stood with humans against the darkness and discovered something she never knew existed within herself. The evacuation proceeded quickly, with the most severely wounded loaded first. But as Zara was helped toward one of the dropships, she looked back at the plaza where so many had made their stand. The deck was littered with the dissolved remains of Void Seekers, and scorch marks showed where reality itself had been damaged by their presence. Rodriguez appeared beside her, his armor battered but his spirit unbroken. "Not bad for your first firefight," he said with that same easy grin. "How do you do it?" she asked. "How do you face something like this and not break?" His expression grew serious for a moment. "Because breaking isn't an option when people are counting on you. Fear is just another enemy to overcome." As their dropship lifted off from the station, Zara could see the final battle taking place in space around them. The remaining human ships were making a fighting retreat, covering the evacuation of civilians while taking massive damage from the Void Seeker fleet. She was safe now, rescued by people who had risked everything for strangers. But somehow safety wasn't enough anymore. Watching the human ships sacrifice themselves to save everyone else, she knew that her life could never go back to the way it was before. The war against the Void Seekers was just beginning, and she had learned something that would change everything. Sometimes the greatest courage came from the most unexpected places. 3 weeks after the battle at Haven's Rest, Zara stood in the conference room of the Galactic Council's emergency session, watching representatives from hundreds of species argue about humanity's request for military support. The debate had been going on for hours, and she could see the frustration building in the human delegation's faces. Admiral Sarah Chen, sister to the captain who had died ramming the Void Seeker command ship, sat quietly at the human table. Her uniform was crisp and professional, but Zara could see the weight of recent losses in her eyes. Beside her sat General Marcus Webb, a scarred veteran whose reputation for tactical brilliance was matched only by his reputation for speaking uncomfortable truths. "The humans are asking us to commit our fleets to what amounts to a suicide mission," declared Ambassador Vorthak of the Hegemony. His crystalline form chimed discordantly as he gestured with multiple arms. "The Void Seekers have conquered entire sectors. No military force has ever successfully pushed them back." "That's not entirely accurate," Admiral Chen said calmly. "At Haven's Rest, human forces not only held them off but actually forced them to retreat. We inflicted significant casualties using conventional weapons and tactics." "A single-station defense against a minor raiding force," scoffed Representative Xylith of the Valorian Confederacy. "Hardly proof that your primitive weapons can stand against their main fleet." Zara felt anger rise in her chest at the dismissive tone. She had watched those primitive weapons save hundreds of lives, had seen human soldiers charge into impossible odds without hesitation. But the assembled diplomats continued their debate as if the desperate courage she had witnessed meant nothing. "The mathematics are simple," announced Logic Prime Unit 7 of the Centauri Collective. "Human military technology is approximately 2 centuries behind current galactic standards. Their ships are slower, their shields weaker, their weapons less efficient. Logically, they cannot succeed where advanced forces have failed." General Webb finally stood, his patience clearly exhausted. "With respect to the assembled representatives, you're all missing the point. This isn't about technology, it's about will." "Will?" Ambassador Vorthak's crystalline form flickered with amusement. General, will cannot overcome physical reality. The Void Seekers possess weaponry that can literally unmake matter at the molecular level. And yet they retreated from Haven's Rest, Webb replied firmly. They retreated because they faced something they hadn't encountered before, people who refused to give up. Zara watched the debate continue, feeling increasingly frustrated with her fellow diplomats. She had filed her own report about the battle, describing in detail what she had witnessed. But sitting in this sterile conference room, surrounded by beings who had never faced the Void Seekers directly, her words seemed inadequate to convey the reality of human courage. During a recess, she found herself in the corridor outside the conference room, trying to organize her thoughts. Admiral Chen approached, her expression weary but determined. Ambassador Zara, the human said formally, I wanted to thank you for your report on the Haven's Rest action. It was illuminating. I only wrote what I saw, Zara replied, though I'm not sure anyone believes it. Admiral Chen smiled sadly. Most species have survived by avoiding conflict, by finding diplomatic solutions or retreating when faced with superior force. It's a reasonable survival strategy, but it doesn't work against an enemy that wants to erase you from existence. Your brother saved my life, Zara said quietly. He saved all our lives. Marcus always said that dying for something worthwhile was better than living for nothing at all, Admiral Chen replied. The Void Seekers represent everything humanity has ever fought against. The idea that might makes right. That the strong have the right to destroy the weak simply because they can. When the session resumed, Zara made a decision that surprised even herself. She stood and requested permission to address the assembly, using her diplomatic credentials to speak as a witness rather than as a representative of her government. Honored delegates, she began, her voice carrying clearly through the vast chamber. 3 weeks ago I believed as many of you do now. I thought humans were primitive warmongers who had somehow stumbled into space travel. I was wrong. A murmur ran through the assembly. The Kithran delegation looked shocked that one of their own was about to contradict official policy. I watched human soldiers charge into melee combat with creatures that could unmake them with a touch. I saw them distribute their own weapons to civilians, teaching them to fight in moments when retreat would have been the logical choice. I witnessed acts of courage that redefined my understanding of what intelligent beings are capable of. Courage is admirable, interrupted Ambassador Vorthak, but it cannot overcome technological superiority. Can't it? Zara challenged. The Void Seekers have been expanding for generations, consuming entire civilizations. Every species they encountered either fled or was destroyed. Until they met humans. For the first time in their expansion, they faced beings who looked at impossible odds and chose to fight anyway. She activated the holographic display in the center of the chamber, showing footage from the Haven's Rest battle. The assembled delegates watched in silence as human soldiers fought hand-to-hand with Void Seekers. As Captain Chen's destroyer rammed into an enemy ship 50 times its size, as ordinary civilians picked up weapons and joined the fight. The Void Seekers retreated, Zara continued. Not because human weapons were superior, but because they encountered something they had never faced before. Beings who would rather die fighting than live in submission. That psychological factor, that refusal to surrender, created a tactical advantage that no amount of advanced technology could overcome. Logic Prime Unit 7's mechanical voice cut through the silence. Anecdotal evidence from a single engagement cannot be extrapolated to predict outcomes against a full Void Seeker fleet. You're right, General Webb said, standing again. One battle doesn't prove anything. But it proves enough. It proves they can be beaten, and if they can be beaten, then we have an obligation to try. The debate continued for hours, but Zara could see that something had shifted. Her testimony, combined with the visual evidence from Haven's Rest, had planted seeds of doubt about the Void Seekers' invincibility. More importantly, it had shown the assembled delegates what human courage looked like in practice. Finally, a vote was called. The result was closer than anyone had expected. Humanity's request for military support failed, but only by a narrow margin. Several major powers, including the Valorian Confederacy and the Nethris Trade Union, abstained rather than voting against it. After the session, Admiral Chen found Zara in the corridor again. Thank you, she said simply. I know that couldn't have been easy. Speaking against your own delegation's position? It was the right thing to do, Zara replied. But I'm sorry the vote didn't go your way. Admiral Chen shrugged. We knew it was a long shot. Most species need to see the threat personally before they'll act. But your testimony will help when the time comes. And the time will come. What do you mean? The Void Seekers won't stop with Haven's Rest. They're testing our defenses, learning our capabilities. Soon they'll launch a major offensive, and when they do, every species will have to choose between fighting and extinction. That evening, Zara sat in her quarters aboard the diplomatic transport, staring out at the stars. She thought about Rodriguez, who had probably returned to some human frontier world by now. She thought about the civilians who had learned to fight because humans showed them how. She thought about Captain Chen, who had given his life to protect people he had never met. A communication came through on her personal device, a message from the Kithrin High Council. They were recalling her from diplomatic service, citing her inappropriate advocacy for human militarism during the emergency session. Her career as a diplomat was over. Strangely, she felt relieved rather than devastated. She had spent her life negotiating and compromising, seeking peaceful solutions to every problem. But some problems couldn't be negotiated away. Some evils had to be fought. She activated her personal communicator and sent a message to Admiral Chen. It was short and simple. If you'll have me, I'd like to volunteer for your fleet. I've learned that sometimes the greatest diplomacy is knowing when talking must end and fighting must begin. 3 days later, she was aboard a human transport heading for the frontier worlds, where she would learn that courage was not a human monopoly. It was a choice available to any being willing to make it. The Void Seekers were coming, and the galaxy would need every willing fighter it could find. But for the first time since the crisis began, Zara felt hope. She had seen what happened when ordinary beings chose to be extraordinary, and she knew that combination of human determination and galactic unity might be enough to turn the tide. The real war was about to begin. 6 months after Haven's Rest, Zara found herself aboard the UES Determination, humanity's newest battleship, watching the final preparations for what everyone knew would be the most important battle in galactic history. The Void Seekers had amassed a fleet of unprecedented size and were advancing toward the core worlds, threatening to erase the heart of galactic civilization. The ship around her hummed with activity as human crew members made last-minute adjustments to weapons and systems. But this wasn't a purely human vessel anymore. In the months following her testimony to the Galactic Council, something unexpected had happened. Individual volunteers from dozens of species had quietly joined the human fleet, drawn by stories of courage and the promise that someone was finally willing to fight back. Nervous? Rodriguez asked, settling into the seat beside her in the ship's observation lounge. He wore the insignia of a lieutenant now, having been promoted after his actions at Haven's Rest. More importantly to Zara, he carried himself with the same calm confidence that had saved her life in that nightmare station. Terrified, she admitted honestly, but I've learned that being terrified and being brave aren't mutually exclusive. Through the transparent aluminum windows they could see the assembled fleet. 47 human warships formed the core of the force, their hulls scarred from countless battles but their weapons gleaming with deadly purpose. Scattered among them were the volunteers, a Valorian dreadnought whose crew had refused their government's orders to stand down, 3 Nethris cruisers whose captains had declared their ships independent, even a Centauri research vessel that had been hastily fitted with weapons by its logical but determined crew. It's still not enough, Rodriguez said quietly. Intelligence estimates put the Void Seeker fleet at over 300 ships, including some new class of vessel that our sensors can't properly analyze. Zara nodded. The mathematics were brutal. Even with their recent victories, the Allied fleet was outnumbered 6-1. But she had learned something important in her months serving alongside humans. Sometimes the most important victories came when the odds seemed impossible. Admiral Chen's voice echoed through the ship's communication system. All hands, this is Admiral Chen. In 1 hour, we will engage the largest Void Seeker fleet ever assembled. I won't lie to you. The odds are against us. Many of us will not survive this battle. But we fight not because victory is certain, but because the alternative is unacceptable. Zara felt a familiar tightness in her chest, the same feeling she had experienced in the plaza at Haven's Rest, fear and determination mixing into something stronger than either emotion alone. Our mission is simple, the Admiral continued. The Void Seekers are advancing on a narrow front, using their numbers to overwhelm individual systems. We will strike at the heart of their formation, disrupting their coordination and buying time for the core worlds to complete their evacuation. We may not be able to stop them today, but we will make them remember the cost of threatening innocent life. As the fleet began its final approach to the battle zone, Zara made her way to the bridge. Admiral Chen had given her an honorary position as civilian liaison, but everyone knew her real role was to document what happened here for the galaxy that might survive them. The bridge was a study in controlled tension. Human officers moved with practiced efficiency, their voices calm and professional as they called out readings and confirmations, but Zara could see the knowledge of their situation in their eyes. They were sailing into the jaws of death itself. "Contact," announced the sensor operator. "Void Seeker fleet detected at maximum range. Computer estimates. By the gods, Admiral, they're showing over 400 ships." A silence fell over the bridge. 400 ships. The intelligence estimates had been wrong. The enemy was even larger than expected. Zara watched Admiral Chen's face and saw no surprise, only grim acceptance. "Time to engagement?" the Admiral asked. 47 minutes at current speed. Signal the fleet. All ships are to implement Battle Plan Omega. No retreats, no surrenders. We finish this here. Battle Plan Omega. Zara had learned enough about human military doctrine to know what that meant. A fight to the death, with no provision for withdrawal. Every ship in the fleet would engage until it was destroyed or until the enemy was defeated. There would be no middle ground. The next 40 minutes passed with agonizing slowness. Zara found herself thinking about her home world, about the quiet diplomatic halls where she had once believed that all conflicts could be resolved through negotiation. She thought about her family, who probably still couldn't understand why their daughter had thrown away a prestigious career to join humanity's desperate war. Then the Void Seeker fleet came into visual range, and all other thoughts fled her mind. The enemy ships were enormous, each one dwarfing even the largest human battleships. They moved through space like living shadows, their dark hulls seeming to absorb the light of nearby stars. Where they passed, space itself seemed to dim, as if reality was being slowly drained of substance. "All ships, this is Admiral Chen. Weapons free. Engage at will." The battle began with a storm of fire that lit up the darkness between the stars. Human kinetic weapons traced bright lines across space, while energy beams from the volunteer ships added their own deadly light to the display. The Void Seekers responded with weapons that seemed to tear holes in reality itself, dark bolts that left empty space where matter had been moments before. The UES determination shook as near misses sent tremors through its hull. Around them, Zara could see other ships in the fleet taking hits, their shields flaring and failing under the relentless assault. A Valorian cruiser simply vanished, erased from existence by a direct hit from a Void Seeker reality weapon. But the Allied ships pressed forward, their weapons finding targets among the enemy fleet. She watched in amazement as human torpedoes punched through Void Seeker hulls, detonating inside their ships and causing massive secondary explosions. The enemy's advantage in numbers was being offset by the Allies' willingness to close to point-blank range, where their primitive but effective weapons could do maximum damage. "Admiral," the communications officer called out, "we're receiving a transmission from the Void Seeker fleet. It's different from their usual signals." "Put it through." A voice filled the bridge, speaking in perfect galactic standard. It was cold and emotionless, but unmistakably intelligent. "Human Admiral, you fight well for such a primitive species. We offer terms. Surrender your fleet, and we will grant your people a swift extinction rather than the slow erasure we have planned." Admiral Chen's response was immediate and uncompromising. "Counteroffer. Leave this galaxy now and we won't hunt you back to whatever dark hole you crawled out of." There was a pause, then something that might have been laughter. "Amusing. You face a force 10 times your size, yet you make threats. Your species fascinates us. We have consumed countless civilizations, but none have shown such persistence in the face of certain death." "Then you haven't been paying attention," Admiral Chen replied. "Humans don't surrender. We don't retreat. We fight until we win or until there's nothing left to fight with. That's what makes us human. We shall see." The transmission ended and the battle resumed with even greater intensity. But something had changed. The Void Seekers were no longer simply trying to destroy the Allied fleet. They were studying it, analyzing human tactics and responses with clinical interest. Zara realized with growing horror that this entire battle might be nothing more than an experiment to them, a chance to observe human behavior under extreme stress. The thought should have been demoralizing, but instead it filled her with anger. These creatures saw intelligent life as nothing more than data to be collected before erasure. "Admiral," the sensor operator announced, "we're detecting massive energy readings from the center of the Void Seeker formation. Something big is powering up." On the main screen, a ship larger than any they had yet seen began to emerge from the enemy fleet's center. It was a kilometer long, its hull so dark that it seemed to exist in its own pocket of space. As they watched, reality began to warp around the massive vessel, creating distortions that hurt to look at directly. "What is that thing?" Rodriguez asked from his position at the tactical station. Admiral Chen's voice was grim when she replied, "That, Lieutenant, is what we came here to stop. Intel called it a reality anchor, a mobile platform capable of permanently altering the fundamental structure of space-time. If they activate it near the core world," she didn't need to finish. Everyone on the bridge understood. The reality anchor wasn't just a weapon, it was a tool for reshaping existence itself. In the wrong hands, it could unmake entire star systems, leaving nothing but empty void where billions had once lived. The final phase of the battle was about to begin, and Zara knew that everything they had fought for would be decided in the next few minutes. The reality anchor began to change the very nature of space around it. Stars flickered and dimmed as the massive Void Seeker vessel drew power from reality itself. Zara watched in horror as a small asteroid simply ceased to exist. Not destroyed, but erased so completely that there was no debris, no energy signature, nothing to show it had ever been there. "All ships, concentrate fire on the reality anchor," Admiral Chen ordered. "Everything we have. Now." The remaining Allied vessels turned their weapons toward the massive enemy ship, but their attacks seemed insignificant against its reality-warping hull. Kinetic rounds simply vanished when they struck the distortion field. Energy beams bent and twisted, their force dissipated harmlessly into empty space. "Admiral," the weapons officer reported, his voice tight with frustration. "Our weapons are having no effect. The distortion field is deflecting everything we throw at it." Zara felt despair beginning to creep into her chest. They had come so far, fought so hard only to face an enemy that seemed truly invincible. Around the bridge, she could see the same thought reflected in the faces of the human crew. For the first time since she had met them, these incredible people looked like they were facing defeat. Then Rodriguez spoke up from his station. "Admiral, I'm reading massive power fluctuations in the reality anchor's distortion field. It's drawing energy from local space-time, but that much power drain has to create instabilities." "Explain." "Lieutenant, if we could overload the field somehow, cause it to collapse, the reality anchor would be vulnerable for a few seconds, long enough for a direct assault." Admiral Chen studied the tactical display. "What would it take to overload the field?" Rodriguez's answer was quiet but clear. "A massive energy discharge at close range. Ship's reactor overload, detonated inside the distortion field. The implications hit everyone on the bridge simultaneously. To get inside the distortion field, a ship would have to fly directly at the reality anchor, surviving the concentrated fire of the entire Void Seeker fleet. And to trigger a reactor overload at close range meant certain death for everyone aboard." "Admiral," the communications officer announced, "we're receiving signals from the fleet. Multiple ships volunteering for the suicide run." Zara watched Admiral Chen close her eyes for a moment, the weight of command heavy on her shoulders. When she opened them again, her expression was resolute. "Negative. The determination will make the run. We're the fastest ship in the fleet and have the best chance of reaching the target." "Ma'am," Rodriguez protested, "there has to be another way." "There isn't, Lieutenant. And even if there was, this is my responsibility, my fleet, my decision." She activated the ship-wide communication system. "All hands, this is Admiral Chen. We are beginning our final approach to the reality anchor. This will be a one-way mission. I want everyone to know that serving with you has been the greatest honor of my life." The bridge fell silent except for the hum of the ship's systems. Zara felt tears running down her face, an involuntary physical response that she made no effort to stop. These people, these incredible human beings, were sailing knowingly into death for the sake of beings they had never met. "Admiral, she said quietly. "Request permission to remain on the bridge." Admiral Chen looked at her with surprise. "Zara, you don't have to do this. We can get you to an escape pod." "With respect, Admiral, yes I do. Someone needs to witness this. Someone needs to remember what happened here and why it mattered." The Admiral nodded slowly. "Permission granted." The UES determination began its final acceleration toward the reality anchor. Around them, the remaining ships of the Allied fleet provided cover fire, drawing the attention of Void Seeker vessels and clearing a path through the enemy formation. Ship after ship fell to the overwhelming enemy fire, but their sacrifice bought precious seconds for the determination's approach. "Entering the distortion field now," the helmsman reported. Immediately the ship began to shake violently as reality warped around them. Gravity fluctuated wildly and the lights flickered as power systems struggled to function in the unstable space-time. Through the view screen, Zara could see the reality anchor growing larger ahead of them. The massive ship's hull was covered in geometric patterns that hurt to look at directly, designs that seemed to exist in more dimensions than human eyes could process. Weapons ports along its length began to glow with dark energy as the Void Seekers realized what the humans were attempting. "Hull integrity at 60% and falling," the damage control officer reported. "We're taking massive stress from the distortion field." "Engineering reports reactor containment is holding but barely," another voice added. "We can maintain it for maybe 2 more minutes." "That's all we need," Admiral Chen replied calmly. "Helm, take us to point-blank range. Engineering, prepare for emergency reactor overload on my mark." The ship shuddered as Void Seeker weapons found their range. Dark energy bolts punched through the hull, leaving holes that seemed to extend into impossible depths. But the determination pressed forward, its human crew maintaining their posts even as sections of the ship simply ceased to exist around them. 500 meters to target, the helmsman announced. "Admiral," Rodriguez called out, "I'm detecting something else. The reality anchor isn't just a weapon, it's some kind of gateway. They're using it to tear a permanent hole in space-time." On the main screen, space behind the reality anchor was beginning to split open like a wound in reality itself. Through the growing rift, Zara could see something that made her soul freeze. An endless void filled with more Void Seeker ships than could be counted. This wasn't their entire fleet attacking the galaxy. This was just the advance force, my God, Admiral Chen whispered. They're planning to bring their entire species through. This isn't an invasion, it's a migration. The truth hit Zara like a physical blow. The Void Seekers weren't just conquering the galaxy. They were fleeing from something even worse in their own dimension. The reality anchor was their escape route, and if it succeeded in stabilizing the rift, millions of their ships would pour through to escape whatever horror had driven them from their home. 100 meters to target, the helmsman reported. Reactor overload sequence initiated. Around the bridge, the human crew maintained their stations with quiet professionalism. No one panicked, no one broke down. They simply did their jobs, knowing that in seconds they would all be dead, but that their sacrifice might save trillions of lives. "It's been an honor serving with all of you," Admiral Chen said simply. "The honor was ours, Admiral," Rodriguez replied, speaking for the entire crew. Zara closed her eyes and thought about everything that had brought her to this moment. A few months ago, she had been a diplomat who believed that courage was the domain of primitive species. Now she was about to die alongside the bravest people she had ever known, and she felt proud to be counted among them. "Mark," Admiral Chen said quietly. "The UES Determination's reactor containment failed in a controlled overload that released the energy of a small star in a focused burst. The explosion tore through the reality anchor's hull and into its core systems, causing a chain reaction that spread throughout the massive vessel. For a moment, the rift in space-time stabilized and began to close. The endless fleet of Void Seeker ships on the other side found their escape route collapsing, trapping them in whatever hell they had been fleeing from. Then the reality anchor exploded, taking the determination with it. 3 days later, rescue ships arrived to find the scattered remains of the Void Seeker fleet retreating into deep space. Without their reality anchor and cut off from reinforcements, the invasion force had lost the will to continue fighting. The core worlds were safe, and the rift that would have doomed the galaxy had been sealed forever. Among the debris, they found a single escape pod containing Zara's personal log, ejected automatically when the determination began its final approach. Her testimony about the battle would be transmitted to every world in the galaxy, ensuring that the story of human courage would never be forgotten. In the years that followed, the tale of the Battle of the Reality Anchor became legend. Schools taught children about the humans who had sailed into certain death to save species that had scorned them. Diplomatic protocols were rewritten to ensure that humanity would never again stand alone against impossible odds. But for Zara, watching the memorial service for the Determination's crew from her hospital bed on a distant medical station, the most important legacy was simpler. She had learned that courage was not the absence of fear, but the decision to act despite it. She had learned that sometimes the greatest victory came not from superior technology or tactics, but from the simple refusal to surrender. Most importantly, she had learned that courage was contagious. The example set by humanity had inspired others to be brave, creating a chain reaction that had saved the galaxy itself. The Void Seekers were gone, but their greatest gift to the galaxy was not their defeat, it was the lesson. They had forced everyone to learn about what intelligent beings could accomplish when they chose to stand together against the darkness. And in the quiet of her recovery room, Zara smiled and began planning her next mission. The galaxy was safe, but there were other threats out there, other challenges that would require people willing to face impossible odds. She had learned from the